Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be painting up the Sloppity Bilepiper for the second time on my channel. Once again unearthing my pile of shame. I got this Warhammer Age of Sigmar Broken Realms from like a box set. This basically was like 90 bucks. I did not pay 90 bucks. God forbid I pay sticker. But essentially the writing was on the wall that the Games Workshop was going to change their model kits and such, and so this was like a great deal at the time. So I was like, okay, I'm going to buy this now and I'll paint this when I'm able to. Well, this is the first time I'm cracking it open. Now I'm cracking out something I have not used in a very long time since I built terrain on this channel, but ceramic stucco. This is basically like the Liquitex modeling putty, except it's a little harder to adhere to the model. Basically what this does is just going to make really good like rotted skin on there. So the model has a bunch of open flat spots and I don't like that, and so I'm going to add it on. It takes a little bit of effort because it doesn't adhere that well, but it eventually gets on. Now I assembled up to the point where we get in the way of painting. The body is entirely together, the stick is together, the Nurgling is on its own, the head is on its own, and the bagpipes are on its own. And I primed them all with Bright Touch General Purpose Gray Car Primer. And while the paint is drying from the priming, I'm going to use Liquitex modeling putty and I'm going to model the base. So I'm just going to apply a relatively thin layer onto the 32mm base. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a hairdryer. I can't show it on screen because it'll blow all this up on my desk away. But basically I use a hairdryer to rapidly dry the top. This makes it workable. And then I take a dry brush and then I just tap everywhere and it adds texture. And then once it's done, I take the model once it's done drying and then just place the Nurgling and the foot of the guy on there to essentially make a little footprint for it. I made it a little too big, and who could predict that? And it's noticeable in the end result, but oh well. Alright, and now for pre-coating. With Eshin Grey, Grey Seer, and White Scar White, we're going to do the pre-coating, and an airbrush is key for this. So with Eshin Grey, we're going to airbrush it from the bottom to create the depth. And then we're going to take Grey Seer and airbrush from a 45-degree angle down, and this will create the light. And so we'll have light and dark values in the shading. Then we're going to take White Scar White in a tiny dry brush, and we're just going to dry brush all over. Now, dry brushing works wonders with Nurgle demons. They just lap it all up, especially with all their little details and stuff. It works very, very well. Alright, and now with Plague Bear's flesh and Lamian medium, we're going to paint all the flesh. So the Plague Bear skin everywhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint with Plague Bear flesh, but we're also going to apply just a little bit of Lamian medium. This is actually going to make the Plague Bear flesh more even. It's not going to heavily pool in some areas. This is going to make the contrast paint flow much better onto the model. And it thins it out a little bit as well. And we're going to apply this, and this is going to be our first layer. And now, with a massive blast from the past, I have not used these in a very long time. But pastels! Pastels, man, I have not used this. So this is basically like for applying color tonal changes, like rosy cheeks on skin and stuff like that. So basically we take a color we want, we scrape some of it into a little place, and these are the colors I have used for this. And essentially what we do is we take our dry brush and we apply it liberally on the area we want, because a lot of it's going to disappear. So when it's in dry brush form, normally you could mix it with like water and turn it into like sort of a pasty paint, but in this form, when it's completely dry, you can change the color and tone of an area. Now, it's not as effective with what we're going to do, but basically the simple idea is bright orange is like for disease, brown is for rotting flesh, purple is to make something blue or pale, and so this is why Nurgle is one of the more fun ones to paint, because you can just add a lot of colors in there. So there's no real rhyme or reason, you can do what you like. But these are just colors that I use. I place the bright orange on the rotted skin, brown on places where he sits a lot, because I've seen like those super obese people, you know, those 700-pound ones that need like their house to be cut open to move them out. The skin where they're constantly sitting or touching the ground turns like to a dark brown. Yeah, that's where I get the idea from. And yeah, just simple stuff like that, and have fun with it. And we're going back to the Plague Bear's Flesh and Lamian medium mix. We're going to apply a second layer of this. Now, we're going to basically reapply it all over the skin. Now, here's the thing, though. So, the bright orange stuff was onto the ceramic stucco, that rotted flesh look. So the thing is, the pigments didn't really adhere that well onto that. The brown pigments adhered very well. But essentially what happens is when you apply this, you have to lightly, like, tap the brush onto the model and let it flow out. Because if you like scrub it with your brush, like painting, you'll remove the pigment. So this is actually kind of a difficult thing to do. I removed a lot of the bright orange. Sadly, that's just how it goes. So the colors, even though were very strong, got very dull, and a little bit of the orange is left. I should have like spread it much further, maybe 2 coats of that to rub it right into the skin, and then apply this contrast paint onto it. But yeah, in the end, multicolored, and the pigments are like sealed in now. Alright, with Magos Purple, Skeleton Horde Contrast Paint, and Guilliman Flesh, we're going to add some color. I had Lamian Medium, but in the end I didn't really use it. Except for Guilliman Flesh, because my Guilliman Flesh was kind of dry, so I had to use this to water it down a bit. But basically, Magos Purple on the intestines, around 2 coats worth. Skeleton Horde Contrast on his spine that's sticking out, and also as a browner. And I applied it to the skin that was ripped off and flipped over a little bit there. And then with Guilliman Flesh, I applied it onto the open patches of his flesh sticking out as the base coat of that for later. And then just have fun with it. I had some diluted Skeleton Horde Contrast with Lamian Medium and some water, and applied it to his face and eyes to add a little more depth to all the details in his face, and simple stuff like that. Alright, with Carrick Stone, Skeleton Horde Contrast, Ustabi Bone, and Screaming Skull, and a little bit of Lamian Medium, we're going to paint the horn and skull that he has on his side. So we're going to start with the darkest layer of Carrick Stone, all over. Then we're going to paint Skeleton Horde Contrast mixed with a little bit of Lamian Medium and water. Now unfortunately I diluted it a little bit too much. And so it was so thin I had to apply multiple coats of it, but I won't bother showing you that. I just basically applied it until it was good enough. Although the thing about applying many very thin coats is that it builds very gradually, so you can see some very nice transitions. But yeah. Then I re-highlighted everything with Carrick Stone. Then I did a very fine highlight with Ushabti Bone all along the edges, most raised areas, and yeah. It's difficult to judge, but basically all the raised areas and stuff. But because I watered it down a lot, I was able to apply like 2 or 3 coats of this in places. Since it was opaque, I was able to apply a few more coats on some areas to build up like highlights. And then finally with Screaming Skull, I applied it on the most prominent raised areas, edges, and tips and stuff as a focal point for like the light. Alright, with Mournfang Brown, Agrax Earthshade, and XV88, we're going to paint the leather belt he has around him. Now, with some watered down Mournfang Brown, we're going to apply this onto the belt. And because it's watered down enough, the pre-coating that we did from the dry brushing and stuff shows through. And if we were speed painting, this would be good enough. But this is a character and I want to go even further. So then we're going to apply Agrax Earthshade onto the model, and it's going to create a good amount of depth and shadow in the belt. Then we're going to go back with Mournfang Brown, we're going to highlight the edges of the belt and the most raised part, the part on his shoulder, basically. And then we're going to paint XV88 onto his, actually we're going to do a mix of Mournfang Brown and XV88 and highlight further the edges, most edges, and the most raised area up top. And then with pure XV88, we're going to highlight not the full edges, but like the most raised edges as focal points for light and such and such. And yeah, so I'm painting this model like piece by piece, essentially, because it's all over the place and there's a lot of different details and stuff. So I find for this model it's easier to organize. I'm just going to go by the main body, then other pieces, and then go from there. Alright, with Steel Legion Drab, Baneblade Brown, and Rackhearth Flesh, we're going to paint his nails. So essentially what's going to happen is we're going to take Steel Legion Drab and we're going to paint all his nails, his toenails and his nails on his hand. Then we're going to take Baneblade Brown and paint basically 80 to 90% of them. And basically the Steel Legion Drab is only going to be visible where it attaches to his skin, body, fingers, whichever. And then with Rackhearth Flesh, we will paint the very tip of each nail, and as far as his toes, the tip of the nail, and like it has like this sharp ridge up top. Yeah. And so this way it makes it for a very good like dark to light with a highlight focal point to the light. And then with Baneblade Brown and Rackhearth Flesh, we're going to paint his spine. So with Baneblade Brown, we're basically going to be painting eyes on each of his spines. One line down the middle, and then 2 lines horizontally. And then with Rackhearth Flesh, we're going to paint basically just the line down the middle, and maybe a little bit on the horizontal slides, if we're able to. This is very thin, and should be within the Baneblade Brown we've painted. Alright, now with Bestigor Flesh and Fugan Orange, we're going to paint these swords that he has. So basically, we're going to paint them with Bestigor Flesh, wrapping all around these bubbly things. And then once it dries, we'll apply Fugan Orange all around it, and it'll create like a ring around each sore. And then once that dries, we will apply Bestigor Flesh on the top part of each sore. So basically like half the sore or the center of each sore to make it highlighted. And that's it. And with Thondia Brown and nothing else, I paint the wood of the staff. So basically I water down Thondia Brown, and when I apply it, it's very thin, and so the undercoat shows through, and it perfectly shows every single edge and piece into the wood. And so I was like, okay, that's good enough. I can't do any better on my own, so I'll just stick with that. Alright, with Genestealer Purple, Gulliman Flesh, and I don't show it here, but Katie of Fleshtone, we're going to paint his bagpipes. So with Genestealer Purple, we're going to paint all of the veins and the what looks like an intestinal tract, but whatever. And then with Gulliman Flesh, we're going to apply it all over. Now if we were speed painting, this would be good enough, but we need to go further. So basically what I do is I take Genestealer Purple and I re-highlight all the veins again. You can still see some of the darker purple there. And then I apply Gulliman Flesh all over again, and then I use Cadian Fleshstone, water down a little bit to make it flow better, and then I basically paint all the flesh of the bag. And so essentially what happens is, once that's settled, I then apply more Gulliman Flesh to add depth and shadow to everything, and then I re-highlight every vein with Genestealer Purple, and then I re-highlight and paint the upper raised areas or the flat areas of the bagpipe with the Cadia Flesh Tone in order to add some depth and shadow into there. And so I basically add darkness and then highlight, darkness, highlight, and I keep going until I'm satisfied. And now with Ushabti Bone, Nuln Oil, and Screaming Skull, we're going to paint the pipes from the bagpipes. So I have no idea really what to paint these as color-wise, so I use the image up front, the artistic image of the box set, because sometimes it's okay to copy the box for ideas, because you may have like one idea in mind of a general color or general parts, but then there are little details and stuff that you have really no idea what you would want to paint it, and you can't really think about it so well, so might as well go with what is suggested on the box art. So for this, paint everything Ustabi bone, then I add Nuln oil, then I edge highlight with the edge of a brush all the edges of the pipes with Ustabi bone and the tips again, and then I add more Nuln oil, and then I do a very fine highlight with Ustabi bone along the edges and the top, and then I do Screaming Skull on the most raised areas, edges, lines, and such, and the tip as well of each bone. And then maybe a little bit of Nuln oil into the holes themselves to add depth. Alright then, with Corn Red, Agrax Earthshade, Bephiston Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, we're going to paint the... actually, I don't know what this is called, but the hat on his stick thing, whatever. Alright, so with Corn Red is going to be the base. Then we're going to apply Agrax Earthshade all over. And so with that out of the way, then we're going to re-highlight with Corn Red. And the basic idea was we're going to paint a relatively large line over the edges, the somewhat sharp-ish folds of the hat, as well as parts of the open plane stuff. We don't want the Agrax Earthshade to be everywhere. We basically want to cover like 80 to 90% of the hat with Corn Red again, and only the deepest, darkest recesses with Agrax Earthshade. Then with Mephiston Red, we want to repaint like half to 3/4 of the thick lines of Corn Red with it. We want to paint all the edges and sharp lines-ish. Now what I want to do is I want to add texture. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a lot of thin lines, like one after another, going all along the hat through its different iterations and different parts and stuff like that. Just a bunch of thin lines. And then with Evil Sun Scarlet, the most raised areas are going to be hit with it, straight lines on its most raised, most obvious edges. And then we're going to paint more lines throughout the entire thing again. And this is going to add a little bit more depth and detail to the hat, this texture-ish look. And with XV88, we're going to paint these 3 little stitches on the hat. And now with Naggaroth Knight, Xerxes Purple, and Genestealer Purple, we're going to paint this little bag that's under the hat. I wanted to make it a distinctly different color so that you can spot it from a distance, so it's noticeable and doesn't blend in with the background. So basically, Naggaroth Knight all over. I watered it down enough so that the undercoating could show, but I wanted to go further. That's good enough for speed painting, but it's also good enough for a guide if you want to highlight further. And so with Xerxes Purple, I highlighted all the edges and large flat planes, and with Genestealer Purple, I highlighted the most raised and prominent edges and flat planes a little bit. And to add a little bit of texture, I painted thin lines on some parts, like feathery-ish even in some places, to help it blend better. And now with Carrickstone, Agrax Earthshade, Baneblade Brown, and Rackhearth Flesh, we're going to paint, as far as I can tell, strips of parchment on his stick. So I accidentally screwed this up. So I didn't use the Baneblade Brown, which was actually the darkest color, so I did the medium and the light. So I did Carrickstone, then applied Agrax Earthshade to add depth and shadow everywhere. Then I re-highlighted all the edges with Carrickstone, like twice, because it was watered down, it was more opaque, and so I could do multiple coats to build up layers. And then with Rackhearth Flesh, I highlighted the very edges of each paper and the most raised areas. Moving on to the head, I'm going to start with the tongue. So I'm going to take a dry brush and some bright reddish pigment and then apply it all over his tongue. This will act as a good guide and help me to see what is shadow, what is raised and stuff, and build up a good starting layer. With Guilliman Flesh, Lamian Medium, and Cadian Flesh Tone, which I added in later, but basically we're going to paint his tongue. So basically what I did was first I applied Guilliman Flesh with Lamian Medium to dilute it a bit, and it's mostly because my Guilliman Flesh is a bit old and it's dried, so it actually has to be diluted, so I'll dilute it with this instead of water. And then basically what I do is I take the Cadian Flesh Tone, water down a bit so it flows and is a bit transparent so I can build up multiple layers. I then paint the edges of its tongue, the top of the bottom part of his tongue, like how it curves at the bottom, and then painting the tip of his tongue and stuff like that, and make sure the paint is all around. And so basically with the process of what I do is I highlight, add depth and shadow with Guilliman Flesh. Highlight, add depth and shadow with Guilliman Flesh. It's a back and forth process till I get the build up multiple layers, multiple highlights, so there's a good transition of very bright to the dark. I then paint like lines across his tongue because I feel like it adds a little bit more depth to him. And yeah, so this is just a back and forth of until I am satisfied. And now with Cantor Blue, Calidor Sky, Hoeth Blue, and Agrax Earthshade, these are some colors I almost never use. So basically, I go onto his hat. So I do a base layer of Cantor Blue all over. Then I apply the Agrax Earthshade all over to add the shadow. Then I go back and re-highlight everything with Cantor Blue. I basically follow the same steps I used for the hat that was on his stick thingy. And so essentially, I basically highlight all the edges. I then go with Calidor Sky, Hoeth Blue, and the process is the same. Highlight all the edges, the big flat open planes, and then we'll move on to Calidor Sky and do the exact same thing, but with Calidor Sky I also paint straight lines going through the hat to build like some texture and some depth to the thing. Do a few layers of that because it's diluted. Then I move on to Hoeth Blue, painting much thinner lines throughout it and doing thin highlights on the edges of stuff. And yeah, that's basically the process of going back and forth with this. And now with Blood Angel's Rend diluted with Lamian Medium, I then apply this all over the Nurgling. And I wanted him to be red so that way he would stand out when he stands right next to the green demon. Now with Troll Slayer Orange, I then use this and dry brush onto his rotted skin and stuff to make it stand out more. I applied a bunch of the pigments and stuff, but then when I applied the other layer of Blood Angel's Red on the second layer, it just like conquered everything or just erased everything. It's like red is a very difficult color. If you dilute it too much, it becomes pink, but it's so heavily pigmented that it can easily cover everything. It's like a strong color like black. It's hard to work with. And now, assembly. So I am going to super glue them to the base with a good amount of super glue so that it like fills in the whole thing in the gap, since there are these little puddles, like indents left for them. So they'll have a very strong bond and seal. And then I assemble the model fully from there. The reason is because the model has a part of the base that, well, it's going to be noticeable if I paint it separately, so I thought, you know what, I'll just assemble it onto the base and then I'll paint the base alongside it because it's relatively simple. With some Mossy Desert, we're going to paint the entirety of the base. So with Vallejo pigments, somber, burnt, umber, and then with Liquitex matte varnish, we're going to apply it to the base. So we're going to take the pigment powder and apply it to the base. We're going to add water to the pigment powder to make it spread around, but it's a little too concentrated, so we add water into it to dilute it and make it, instead of from a sludge to something that spreads out and you can see the color underneath. Then we're going to apply matte varnish once this dries, and then we're going to apply more water after the fact to make sure it dilutes better. And basically the matte varnish is just going to hold the pigments down, and the water is going to help everything spread out and make it look like the dirt and pigment stuff is more natural and not just plops of sludge. Alright, with Waystone Green, Nurgles Rot, and Uriel Yellow, we're going to paint Rot. So basically with Waystone Green, I'm going to apply this to this single drop of something coming out of the bagpipe. So this was a mistake. I should have just painted that yellow and then apply Nurgles Rot on it. So basically what I do is I take the Nurgles Rot, which mine is a bit different than everyone else's because I mixed a bunch of yellow ink into it, making it more liquidy, but it wasn't yellow enough, so I now have to apply Uriel Yellow into it. And so basically I would just add Nurgles Rot with Uriel Yellow and add some water into it to make it flow better. And then just apply this wherever you like. I applied this all over the base and it made this rotted color and did a good covering. As far as the Waystone Green I painted that drop like 3 or 4 times to make it look like there's a good amount of rot coming on it. The Waystone Green was just an undercoat. And now with Dawnstone and Gray Seer, we're going to paint the eyes. The 2 eyes, one on the stick and one on the face. So with Dawnstone, we're going to use this as the dark color and fill in the pupil, or the eye. And then with Gray Seer, we're going to paint the eyeball, the pupil, the dot, on the center. And now with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, we're going to apply this all over the model. And now with Liquitex Gloss Varnish, we're going to use this to add wetness to the model. So basically we're going to apply this into their mouths, their tongues, the sores that are all throughout, the bagpipes themselves to make it wet or slimy looking, and stuff like that, and open sores of wounds and such and such. And this is just to add some shininess to it to make it look wet. Oh, and also the eyes as well. And now with Balthazar Gold and Runelord Brass, we're going to paint the metallic pieces. So Balthazar Gold is going to be our base coat. We're going to apply it on the metal pieces of his bagpipe, his anklets, his little bracelet thingies there, the jingle thingies on the hat on his stick, stuff like that. And then we're going to highlight the edges of pretty much everything with Runelord Brass, which is a nice transitional color. It's not the most silvery thing, but it's subtle. And it's fine. And then finally, Blood for the Blood God Technical Paint. We will apply this on all his open wounds and sores to make it look like there's some blood underneath. And we painted the base coats of all that with Golden Flesh, which was a good base color. And so this will look dark and deep red blood. And we'll paint like strips here and there so that it touches the edges of each of these open sores to make it look like there's a little bit of blood splatter here and there. And we are done. I just trimmed up the base a little, and there were a few small details here and there that I took care of, like this maggot coming out of the back of the hat, small other things here and there, but they didn't really matter. And so yeah, the model is done. This is the second one I've painted on my channel, but this one I'm going to keep for myself, for my own personal army. And yeah, it's pretty good, I guess. I mean, it's distinct, clear, you can see, because of the bright colors and everything. You can see and pick out the certain things from across the table when you're looking at it on a tabletop and stuff. It's very colorful, it's very clean looking, like the colors are sharp, distinct. It's not like messy or bland or everything spread out. So overall, it's a good model. The Nurgling is a good companion to it, with color-wise to make it stand out more. And so when you look at it from a distance, you can easily pick out all the major parts. So color scheme-wise, organization-wise, it's a very good model. This metal really shines out. It's very good. The Rune Lord brass made it really shine. And yeah, it's pretty good. But I don't know. I feel like it could be better. I don't know how, though. It's a solid 8 out of 10, but just barely. Maybe it's because of the colors or maybe everything else. I feel like maybe it's missing something, or I don't know. Something could be better. That's what I'm thinking. But it is a solid 8 out of 10. Is it a 9? I, for some reason, can't really give it a 9. I don't know why. It'd be like an 8.8 or something if I went like that. But for some reason, I can't really justify and say it's a 9, even though it has a lot of detail on it, a lot of the stitching for all the hats and stuff to add more depth, more character to it to make things not so throwaway. But I feel it's definitely a solid 8 out of 10. Yeah, right. And yeah, that's it for this model. And League of Votann will be coming up next. This thing is a little bit rushed. If you notice, I didn't show my list of paints for the beginning because I forgot to get all that information because, I just forgot. I was in a bit of rush to finish this because basically League of Votann, I ordered it from eBay, saved $30. I didn't know that eBay would sell these box sets when they just come out. I'm going to do that from now on so I don't have to pay $200 for the new stuff. But essentially, eBay said, you know what, it's coming on Saturday, be ready. And then eBay emailed me a day later and says, you know what, it's coming on Tuesday. So I took my time and stuff with painting this because I had time to fill it out. And then eBay was like, we're kidding, here it is today on Saturday. So I really had to rush this model to get it out on time and stuff like that, so I forgot a few things. But overall, as far as the model itself, I didn't rush the painting, but the organizing behind the scenes is a little rushed. But alright. So League of Votann is next. So like the video if you like the video, comment if you want to comment, share it if you want to share it, and more to come. Soon-ish, maybe. I don't know. Who knows.